Please watch the video until the end to feel the full sweep of their strange, sweet journey. Chapter 1. The Man at the Market. Amelia had seen him before the crowd had a name for him. She, who liked to sit beneath the sycamore at the little market and sketch strangers as if she could catch their true outline with charcoal, recognized his posture first. The straight back, the deliberate pause in front of the clockmaker's window. From her bench she watched the other shoppers part around him as if a carriage had stilled in the street. He carried himself with an old insistence on politeness, and his clothes, tailored, dark, and edged with a collar that spoke of another century, stood out like a declaration. The market hummed, the bell at the baker's, children chasing a stray dog, the occasional shout of a vendor. Yet he moved through it as though he had been placed into a painting and was trying to learn how to breathe. Amelia's sketchbook filled with the angles of his face, the line of his jaw softened by the streetlight. When a vendor sneered at the gentleman's puzzled questions about subway tokens, Amelia intervened with a nudge that surprised them both. "Are you lost?" she asked, and his eyes, clear, curious, met hers like a salute. He answered in a voice so measured it could have been composed for a drawing room. "I am, in a manner of speaking. This place is magnificent and yet not quite as the map promised." They walked and talked until the stars were a cluster of stitches on a black cloth. He confessed that his name was Sebastian Crown and that he had woken in a place he did not recognize. Amelia learned he loved books, music rubbed with the breath of old halls, and the art of folding a handkerchief into an improbable perfection. He asked about flossing and elevators with equal wonder. She found herself explaining the subway as if telling him a myth. When they parted, at her insistence that she could not accompany a stranger home, he bowed so gracefully it looked as though a poem had been performed. Amelia returned to her bench and to the small, persistent thought that a life might permanently begin in an ordinary evening. Chapter 2. Rules of 2 Times. The next morning the newspaper called him a curiosity. By afternoon the internet had given him different names. Amelia, who watched the world with an artist's skepticism and a friend's honesty, knew more than anyone would credit. Sebastian's confusion was not affected. He told her, in private, that he remembered a house with gas lamps and a garden that smelled of roses in the summer, and that the last thing he recalled was a carriage rolling across cobblestones and a gentleman's glove slipped from a lady's hand. She did not ask how the impossible happened. Instead, Amelia asked practical things. Did he have money? Where could he sleep? Could he navigate a phone? The answers were charmingly literal and often comically wrong, but beneath them lay a fierce intelligence and a quick capacity for learning. He learned to carry a metro card like a passport, to nod at strangers with a lighter hand, and to order coffee without asking for a tablespoon of cream like it was a potion. They created rules, as people do when sailing from different shores. He would not intrude on her work. She would teach him the small, ordinary magic of smartphones and espresso. He would teach her the art of writing a proper letter, of taking an afternoon to smell lavender, of promenading with an umbrella even when rain was scarce. In the quiet hours they traded lessons like lovers exchange confidences, her modernities for his courtesies. Amelia watched him fall into the city with the care of someone mapping a delicate bridge. Each time she opened her apartment door and found him reading her mail as though it were a new scripture, she felt the pace of her life widen. It was frightening and luminous, like seeing a familiar painting with a new color added. Chapter 3. The Measure of Love. Love arrived the way it often does in stories people think they have outgrown, not as a declaration but as a series of small mercies. He learned her favorite tea and brewed it with the reverence of a ritual. He read aloud to her when deadlines made her hands shake. She, in return, taught him how to hail a taxi without apologizing, how to taste wine without flinching, and how to make a playlist that could hold someone through a restless night. There were moments when history pressed against the window. Museum curators buzzed around Sebastian with a hunger that made him shrink like a man being measured for a suit. He flattered himself with the notion of belonging in glass cases and explanatory placards. Amelia found it humiliating and tender at once. He was not an exhibit. He was a person who chipped at the edges of her day and left little footprints of tea steam and ink. Amelia sometimes lay awake and imagined the calendar burning. If love were a thing to be scheduled, theirs would be unaccounted for. Yet each morning the same handsome face would be there over the folding of laundry, and she would think the world was less certain than she had previously believed, and kinder. Chapter 4. The Rift of Time. Whatever balm the city provided could not heal time's wounds. Questions multiplied. How to build a future when one belonged to an age that had been catalogued into books? Sebastian missed the cadence of his childhood songs. Amelia missed the easy predictability of her bank account and the quietness of a life without constant wonder. A crisis came in the form of a letter, or perhaps a rumor, the sort that could be true if it wanted to be, traveling through channels of scholars and enthusiasts. There might be a way to send him back. The idea was terrible and suddenly logical. For nights they weighed probability like coins. To send him back would be to erase the small constellations they'd formed: Saturday markets, a slow Sunday in bed, a margin note in a book. To keep him was to ask him to give up everything he had known. Sebastian, who had learned to braid the world's new noises into his days, placed his palm over Amelia's and said, "I have read many plays. In all of them, the characters speak of sacrifice. But I do not wish mine to be spoken of in acts. I wish it to be lived." His voice trembled, and for the first time Amelia felt the unvarnished truth of what she had invited into her life: a complete and present heart, willing to trade centuries for a woman who made him laugh. Chapter 5. A New Testament. None of the answers were simple. The scholars proposed a mechanism that sounded like alchemy. The city proposed paperwork and legal names. What settled them both, finally, was not an invention but a choice. Sebastian would not be a relic, nor would he be exiled back into someone else's past. He would remain, not as a curiosity but as a man who took up work that fit him, restoring old buildings, teaching history with the voice of someone who had once lived it. Amelia found him a rent-stabilized studio near a narrow street of bookshops. He found her admiration not as an obligation but as a mirror. They made a ritual out of compromise. He learned to ride a bicycle. She learned to waltz in a small kitchen with teacups as props. They built a life stitched from the old and the new. Dinner parties where guests in jeans argued politely with guests who wore cufflinks. Holidays that honored both a birthday and a forgotten saint's day. Arguments that ended with letters written on soft paper and read aloud by moonlight. The city adjusted, too, in its way. Sebastian was not a curiosity. He became a fixture. Children would ask him for stories, and he would oblige with theatrical bows. Lovers would whisper that there was magic in the corner of that block, where people still nodded and opened doors for one another without thinking of it as performance. Chapter 6. The Long View. Years folded like pages. There were mornings Amelia could no longer recall how quiet the city had once been. They grew older in the ordinary ways: a new freckle, a streak of silver, a cough that lingered through winter. But there was also the extraordinary, unplanned trips to the countryside where Sebastian taught children to read by the light of a lantern, exhibitions he curated that made people weep because the past felt like someone's beloved relative. The storyteller who knew their tale best, Amelia's friend who had sketched them beneath the sycamore, would sometimes say that the true romance was not the astonishment of finding a man out of time, but the courage to make room for him. Love, she understood now, was a map drawn by two hands that could not see all the roads at once. They drew anyway. On a late autumn evening, when the city smelled like rain and roasted chestnuts, they stood by the same clockmaker's window where the encounter had first begun. Sebastian reached for Amelia's hand, the skin at his knuckles mapped with fine lines of laughter. "We chose this life," he said softly. "We plucked it like a fruit and ate it, sweet and tart." "And I would do it again," Amelia said, and she meant it. He kissed her with the serious gentleness of a man who had once been taught to bow, and in that bow had learned how to bend toward another person's world. The clock chimed, and the sound was less a marking of hours than a bell that had come to belong to them both. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give the video a like, leave a comment, and share the video.